Great to be joined again on Flow FM by the Executive Director of ABARES, Dr. Jared Greenville. How are you today?
Yeah, very well, thank you, and thanks for having me back on.
Always a pleasure, and good talking about what's of great interest to our farmers when we look at the grain and canola markets. First of all, this big talking point has been the Ukraine conflict throughout the year and these rising grain prices off the back of that. What are you seeing in the current and even futures market activity off the back of that conflict?
Yeah, that conflict is still certainly creating a whole bunch of uncertainty and volatility in grain markets and oilseeds markets as we look out and today really even. And what we're seeing is a continuation of some high prices across the board really, and that relates to both, that uncertainty that's going on, but it also has the same impacts the other impacts that we've seen relates to weather and growing conditions that are occurring in many of the other major grain producing regions, which for this year have been, for grains in particular, been pretty poor, and we're not expecting that to turn around in terms of supplies either.
Yes, whilst we're getting plenty of wet weather from La Nina, developed some pretty miserable conditions for peoples in other parts of the world in cropping areas.
That's right. So the thing that benefits us hinders them, and we're seeing global production of particularly wheat and barley down quite a bit, and further tightening is expected as we look out over, the close of our season and as harvest continues. We're expecting that's going to continue to support high prices, and looking at the prices for milling wheat and feed wheat in Australia today, and they're still well above what they were at this time last year. And if we look across the year, they've been well above that entire period. For oilseeds, the outlook, although uncertain, particularly with this call now of La Nina returning, had been for a rebound in some of the oilseed production globally, particularly out of Canada in terms of canola. And that puts some downward pressure on prices. But there's a big uncertainty as to now what's going to play out in terms of that growing season. And we're still seeing canola prices, our current export prices, above where they were at this time last year, going out of WA. So prices are still really high, although they've come back in canola a little bit, but still well above what we normally expect.
And to what extent within our own domestic market are we starting to price or see some expectation when it comes to the quality of the crop? It's difficult for farmers maybe even to get in and plant in the first place some time ago, but now even to work the crop. Are we seeing some quality downgrades expected?
Yeah, I think it'd be fair to say that there will be some quality downgrades, particularly with this seasonal outlook. And we saw that last year, particularly in New South Wales. We saw a significant kind of downgrade in terms of quality in the wheat crop. Feed wheat is still pricing really high, so there's a small saviour there, but certainly well below milling wheat. And given the outlook and given the rain it's had over the last little while, there'd be certainly issues with quality, I think, coming into harvest this year. The full extent we won't know for now, but I think your assessment at the front there, that these things are going to form part of the expectation in terms of the returns is really starting to come through.
Now, just to let me in on the cycle in terms of ABARES and when it brings out its next projections, I guess some of the wetter conditions and things we're talking about, when are we likely to see that reflected in your next forecast?
So we'll do another round of forecasts in December, so that will certainly get picked up then as we get a good feel for the current weather systems that are going through and the impacts that they have had. And then, what we might expect over the last little bit to finish up towards harvest. We'll also get a good feel at that point in time as to, what is actually going on with harvests. Are they going to be delayed? And we saw that last year that, a number of the harvests were several weeks late, and then rain at poor times delayed that even further. So we'll have a feel for that then. And it seems, as luck would have it, every time we come out with a forecast, something happens in terms of the weather. Usually not favourable to make a second guess, but hopefully we'll have a bit more certainty, certainly this time of year.
And so when it comes to, I guess, the last report or the latest data you've got, just where are you projecting things may be heading on the pricing front for our grain producers and indeed on the oilseeds front?
Yeah, so based on what we could gather at the last in September when we put out our last forecast, we're expecting still a very sizable crop across Australia, the fourth largest on record in terms of our winter crops, so the wheat, barley and canola. We're expecting that, prices for our products to remain high. So, in fact, we're expecting wheat prices to bump up a little bit, about 2%, barley prices up about 4% on what they had been on as a kind of average annual price. But we had that expectation that canola prices would come back a fair bit, around 16%, but remain at, close to record levels. I think that one's the one where there's globally more uncertainty as to what will happen. And so we'll know a little bit more as the weather pans out for that. So far, the milling versus the feed wheat difference has been pretty stable. And so feed wheat prices, they sit below, but they are still quite high. So those kind of impacts, if you got, whatever price you got for feed wheat last year, would expect it to be a little bit above what you get this year.
We saw in South Australia where there's a more, in recent times, diversified options in terms of getting grain out of South Australia, competition therefore for the grain and therefore some better prices or a premium, it's been described, compared to the eastern states. Is that what you're seeing in the state-by-state level in terms of price expectations? Yeah,
it's a good point that you raise here in terms of the ability to get product out to market and the impacts that's having on some of the domestic prices at the moment. And certainly we're seeing that given that we're running up against kind of capacity constraints and our ability to export, although we're exporting at a record rate, that is putting some downward pressure on some domestic prices, and there is that difference across the jurisdictions. Linked in with, the ability to move grain in rail networks and also, on trucking networks, and you don't need to go far these days to see, a massive amount of damage to roads from potholes and so forth, which isn't helping. So what we're seeing is, I guess, some of the prices on the eastern seaboard being a little bit lower than those areas which have more options to get that product out to market. And with another big crop on the way, some of those, I guess, pressures in the supply chain are going to continue.
Well, we look forward to those reports in December from ABARES Executive Director Dr. Jared Greenville. Thank you so much for joining us today on Flow.
Thanks very much for having me on.